about the flavour of a Magic card, oftentimes we default to talking about the art or the mechanics, or even the colour identity. But we forget that a card's name and flavour text contextualise the card in a way nothing else can. Today we'll be talking to writer Anthony Tessitore about writing for card games and the foundational role text plays in building flavour. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour, design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we have a very special guest on the show. He is a CCG writer. He's a game designer. We have the one and only Anthony Tessitore. Hi, Ant. How's it going, mate?
Hey, good. How are you guys?
Not too bad at all.
Very well.
Yeah, nice. So we've got you on today, mate, to talk about primarily flavour texts and naming conventions in collectible card games. You have, your career in CCGs is based on writing primarily, but you've also moved into game designing as well. For our listeners who might not necessarily know a lot about you, because one of the things we're going to talk about today is kind of the under spotlight that writers don't tend to be in the spotlight as much. Like, for those of people that kind of need to know who you are, like, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out, I was a staff writer for Gathering Magic, what used to be Gathering Magic, now it's CoolStuffInc. So I would write articles, then I got picked up and I wrote names and flavor text for Magic. I started with Magic Origins. I wrote through, I believe, Eternal Masters. I can't remember exactly where I stopped. It might have been a Commander set.
I think we, when we were talking before, we landed on that you finished with Modern Horizons, because Ren and 6 was one of the last
That's
cards.
right. Modern Horizons. Yeah, you're right. So I wrote, for about 3.5, 4 years. I did some other stints for some smaller projects here and there. And then ultimately I ended up co-founding my own gaming company, tabletop gaming company. It's called GuildHouse Games. And we produce a game that I co-designed with a friend of mine. It's a CCG. It's called Varia. And so I've done a lot of names and flavor text for that as well as game design, narrative design, things like that, art direction. I'm kind of like wearing all hats at the moment since we're an indie shop, and I kind of have to do that. But that's where I'm at now. So
excellent, cool. And then, like, one of the reasons that we kind of got in touch with each other was through Vorthos Mike, who's been on the show, and you've worked with him for a long time on your Snack Time podcast and write for CoolStuffInc as well. And I think I was referencing a card in the one of the latest sets. I think it must be M21, or it could be Jumpstart, because who fucking knows what sets are anymore. There could be a million different things.
It's just like an avalanche of cards. That's like,
like, I'm not complaining about like the amount of cards, but it's hard to keep track of where they're coming from. And I was referencing one of the cards that it was an uncommon, and the flavor text on it seemed to have, like, it built up a whole world of stuff around this uncommon and gave these characters on the card like a lot more life than usual. And like, we started having a big discussion about flavor text and how its uses in world building and all this kind of thing and the other. And like, that's your whole background. So when it comes to flavor text and world building, like, how important do you think, as someone who is a writer, is flavor text to a trading card game or a collectible card game? Like, how can it be used?
Oh, so flavor text, really, names and flavor text kind of are in the same bucket, because they're both game writing. The card name itself is one of, if not the most important thing on the card. I equate them to kind of like bookends, like, on a shelf, right? You have one bookend that everything leans on, right? That's the card name. The flavor text is there to kind of like keep everything from just falling apart, right?
Title versus blurb.
Right, exactly. So it's like flavor text is not always necessary, and sometimes it serves the card more by not being there, right? Like on a great example is anytime you've ever seen Lightning Bolt or Counterspell with that like really succinct, centered game text, like that one-liner, and there's no flavor text, that's actually serving the card more by highlighting the game mechanic itself than it is if there was like this big paragraph of exposition there, right?
Sure.
But really, like when you look at a card, the name tells you everything, right? So, for example, the card that we were talking about on Twitter that you alluded to was Twin Blade Assassins, right?
Sure.
When you pull that card out of a pack and you see Twin Blade Assassins, what are you immediately expecting?
Death.
Death, but also assassins, right?
Yeah. Actual
Like,
characters, right? Yeah.
if that card does not have assassins or assassinate something in some way, you're going to be disappointed, right? If that art showed like a dog and a cat, right, which is on another card in one of the sets that just recently came out, Twin Blade Assassins wouldn't really resonate. It would be more confusing than anything else, right? And so the name really just kind of like sets you up for what to expect, right?
Sure.
It's like anything else, like a movie title. You go see the Avengers. The movie's called Avengers. Like, you expect to see the Avengers, right? If the Avengers ever come on the screen, that's a terrible movie title. What flavor text does is, first and foremost, it's there to tie everything together. So if you have a mechanic on the card that maybe is very game heavy, so something that you would see a lot in like Magic the Gathering, but maybe doesn't have a whole lot of resonance. So something like sacrifice a forest to gain an effect, right? It's hard to kind of like tie a narrative to that just through the art or just through the name. And so where flavor text can kind of pick up the slack is that the flavor text can come up with this neat little sentence or two that either reinforces or explains why this particular elf sacrifices forests to get a buff.
Sure.
For example, right? So that's flavor text's like principal job, is to fill in any gaps that are missing in the card's narrative. When you have a card that doesn't need that, because it's, the name already does it, the art already does it, and the mechanic is super clear, so maybe like a fire breathing dragon, right? That's your opportunity to do some other interesting things, whether it's like world building or what we were talking about on Twitter, introducing new characters that maybe don't exist yet, right? It can serve as kind of this proving ground where you can build lore. Because, Magic sets come out, there's 300 cards plus in a set, right? Each card has the potential to have this tiny little paragraph on it where you can throw out a lore idea. And it might miss with the community. They might not even read it. It might not resonate. That's okay. But if you write something that really resonates with a lot of people, like Fibblethip's flavor text did, right?
Yeah,
that was totally just a one-off, like, hey, let's just try this and see what happens.
Yeah,
right?
obviously
And
the community
people
picked it up and they
loved it.
went with it. Yeah.
Yeah, they loved it. And so of course that now becomes part of canon, and people are, oh yeah, we always want to do that. We meant to do that. Like, no, it was just a, throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks. Oh, here's a cute idea. Let's just see if other people enjoy it. Right. And then when they do, then it becomes a way to kind of grow your brand and your IP. Right.
Sure. I think one of the cards that I was really excited, and we're talking about M21, which isn't one of the sets that you wrote for, but obviously the principles are all the same.
Right.
One of the cards I was excited with when we were talking about pushing new ideas and new characters, I think one of the things I quoted you was it's the card Enthralling Hold, which is just an enchantment aura, but the flavor text is a quote from a character called Tahim the Puppet Master, and I looked back, he's not a character that already exists in the game. He's not in on any of the cards. He might be in the novels, I'm not quite sure, but I doubt it. So this is a new character that they either might have in the pipeline or they might just be trying out the name and the flavor, because it immediately evoked a lot of stuff to me as a player, and I'm sure it did to a lot of other people. Like, in your experience, is this something, if you were to write this kind of quote and then stick a name on it and it got approved by whoever the kind of art director is or the flavor director, is this something that you would expect to be taken further, or do you just kind of let that go? Like, how far can you push flavor text and introducing world building?
So really, you can do it as many times as you want. So I can give you a great example, actually. So when I was working on Amonkhet, I was doing names and flavor text, and there's a card called Magma Spray, right? It's like a
Yeah.
one-off little like instant, right? Deals 2 damage, thing gets exiled. So it was a way to kind of get around the core mechanic of the set, which was, embalming your creatures and bringing them back from the graveyard, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote this little one-liner: "Ashes can't be embalmed," right? And attributed it to Neheb, initiate of Oncrop, right? Just
Yeah.
random person, who cares, right? Didn't even think twice about it. So Neheb ends up being a legend in Hour of Devastation. He's like a Minotaur character who gets turned into an Eternal.
Sure, and then he even comes back late in a later set, War of the Spark.
Yeah, we've seen more of him than we've seen of some other characters we've known for years.
Exactly, we've seen him twice already, right? But that's an example of like just a character who just showed up randomly in flavor text, and then was later created a card around, right? And really, what you can think of from like it's not really even like it's almost like marketing, right? Like you make a game and you know that you're going to have expansions, and you know that you have other products like Commander that focus on legendary creatures, right? So when you have a core set like this, where you have an opportunity to just throw out random lore that's not tied to a particular setting,
sow some seeds.
This is the best time to be throwing out people like Tahim the Puppet Master. Like, let's just see if anyone gravitates to these characters. And then if they do, then in the future, when we release a Tahim the Puppet Master commander deck, let's say, then everyone's like way more excited about it than they would be if no one knew who Tahim was.
Sure.
Right.
A great example of that is Bruce Tull, Boorish Herder. He was something that came out in that Commander product that year, and had only been referenced in flavor text from Zendikar. So when he came out, most people kind of went, "All right, yeah, sure, new Boris Commander." But then there was those kind of Vorthos few that really flipped out when they saw it. And like, this is why, this is why to people like me and Nathan, like, this is really important. But it's cool to hear it from people who actually work on it, that there is a lot of forethought put into it, even if it is jazzing around with ideas. It's really cool.
Does it come in the other direction of where you get certain characters that you're required to name drop like a certain number of times throughout cards, and then you kind of go, okay, well, obviously there are certain cards that might be, say, when you get Planeswalkers like signature spells, like, Nissa's Revelation, and realistically you're going to be tying a character to that spell. Well, there must be obviously a certain number of slots. You're like, okay, well, we have this character, we need 6 spells with them in the kind of format and everything. Like, I take it you must have some requirements as well coming back the other way.
So definitely, whenever there's a card that predominantly features a planeswalker or is like a significant ability of theirs, then we're encouraged to tie them in through either the name or the flavor text in some way, right? One of the things that they've been doing lately with the core sets is they focus them around a particular planeswalker. So like this year it's Teferi. So I wouldn't be surprised if they asked for a little more Teferi quotes than normal. I know when I worked on I forget which core set it was, but the one that focused on Chandra, we were asked to try to either quote Chandra or reference her in our writing when we felt like it was appropriate, just because that's the person that they're trying to highlight for the set. When it comes to just a regular set of like Amonkhet or Ixalan or something like that, they provide you a guide that tells you like, hey, these are our main characters, so if you do want to use them and reference them, you can, and that may even be encouraged. But they, at least in my experience, they would never say like, hey, you need to meet a quota of X number of quotes by Gideon or something like that.
I guess it's good because then you end up with a mix of the names that you notice and you recognize, and then the new names that, as you say, like with the Puppet Master, that you're like, oh, okay, well that's a whole new slew of headcanon that can potentially be explored.
Right. Yeah, and honestly, like when the sets would come out and we would get these, any creative who works on the product, they get this thing. It's like a style guide that kind of explains, here's the setting that we're trying to build and capture, and this is what we're looking for, and it's more a vibe than anything else. It's more like I'll keep going back to Amonkhet because it's my favorite. Amonkhet's my baby. I feel like that's where that was kind of like my turning point as a writer.
No, I played the shit out of that set. I know those cards
Oh my
very
god,
well.
I love.
It had a really nice flavor to
that
it.
set so much.
It's funny, for a plane that had just literally, it was a bubble of a town. Like it felt really deep. Like it had a lot of depth.
The visual narrative of that set is so cool to me.
Trials
this idea
and everything,
of,
very cool.
But it's mass production.
It's a factory.
The cool thing is it's a factory, exactly. And the sun is the clock on the wall. And you're just counting down the hours to when can I leave work? When can I leave work? And there's this
I'm imagining a Les Mis and Amonkhet crossover where it starts with them
right?
That'd be amazing.
Oh, it's insane. And the river is the conveyor belt, and the people are coming down it, and they're just it's incredible.
And then the salvation at the end, and it's not a demon comes through and turns the river to blood. Oh, beautiful.
Right, it just wrecks everything. Just can you imagine that? Oh man, one more hour, we get to punch
exactly. We've done it.
And the door opens and just somebody's there, like a demon is there. I'm just gonna kill you.
Yeah, no, it's like in the Simpsons when they think they're in their cult, and he just ends up being a guy on a bike with a whistle in his mouth. It's all been a dupe. You've been duped this entire time. Thank you for your $5,000.
Well, the really depressing thing about Amonkhet, which I always found is that there was this idea, if you were casually looking at the story, it would seem that Bolas comes in at the end and it's like, oh, he's come and he's fucked the entire plane up. But we've never seen Amonkhet true to how Amonkhet is meant to be, because the first thing we see of Amonkhet, Bolas is already there and he's already fucked the system.
Right.
It's crazy depressing when you think about it.
So during Amonkhet, I actually worked on the team. I was the principal creative consultant on the 2 trailers that came out for Amonkhet and Hour of Devastation.
Yeah.
And I pushed so hard and I didn't know, I wasn't privy to where they were planning on taking it in Ravnica and having Nicol Bolas summon his throne into the plane, and I didn't know all that stuff was happening, right? But I was pushing so hard for an Hour of Devastation, because in Amonkhet there's this setup where it's okay, there's this giant pyramid and there's this big throne that's empty, right? The God Pharaoh's empty throne, and I just kept thinking, in Hour Devastation, when Nicol Bolas shows up, how badass would it be if he just landed on the throne and kicked it over, just didn't give a shit about anything. It was you idiots have been worshiping me. I'm here to harvest you. I don't care about this. So I was trying so hard to get the trailer to just be a bunch of people worshiping this throne, and then Bolas shows up and just starts punching stuff and just wrecking everything.
Dream stomping, beautiful, fantastic.
But anyway.
that's a really good thing about Magic, because as you say, it does feel like when you have these characters that you see in flavor text from years back, that it does create, it almost retrofits a broad a lengthening to the story, because we've been thinking about this story arc for 7 years, this guy's always been around and everything, and it does create, as you say, that forward future thinking kind of aspect
right
as well. It's very, very
cool. It creates a nice, it makes it feel alive, right? It makes the world feel alive, and that's something that Mike and I used to talk about a lot. In core sets, they used to do this thing where they would peek in on existing planes. So they would just look in the Innistrad for a card, right? And those little windows, those little glimpses, were fantastic because it made those other worlds feel like they were alive and breathing and existing, even though you weren't currently there. So while you're on Zendikar doing whatever, Sorin is still stuck in a wall on Innistrad, or was for a while, right? And so we would get these little glimpses here and there, kind of remind you hey, there's these other worlds out there that are still existing. And that is really cool. That's a neat thing that Magic can do, because they have this multiverse in their property.
That's why Plane Chase works so well. They just gave you, here's 28 different planes that we might not ever see, but I mean, it gives us things to think about, which is very cool.
Well, this is a cool thing with something like Magic Origins, which was the first set that you got to work on properly for Magic, where Magic Origins was kind of it's what they would have made as a core set at the time if they were still doing core sets, but it's trying to kick off this new overarching narrative for the next 3 or 4 years. And in that set, you followed the 5 Justice League planeswalkers of the Gatewatch,
Right.
and you followed each of their home planes, and some of them we already knew, right? So like for Gideon, we already knew Theros at that point. With Jace, we already knew Vryn, even though I haven't really been to Vryn proper. With Nissa, we already knew like Zendikar, etc. But for Chandra, we had yet to go to Kaladesh, but then in that Magic Origins set, you're seeing these Kaladesh cards, and I started when I played Kaladesh through. It's felt so familiar to me, seeing a lot of these like Gyrapur and all these
Right.
different foxes and all this kind of style. And I didn't quite know why, because I wasn't as keyed in as I am now. And then I look back at Magic Origins and I think, oh, that's where it was. I'd seen this entire aesthetic and this story start to play out 2 or 3 years beforehand.
Right.
And a lot of that was to do with the flavor text and the kind of the naming conventions and all that kind of stuff.
Now imagine if when they put Origins out, if there was like a huge pushback for like Chandra's cards and they're like, what is this plane? It's super weird. We don't like it. Then maybe they would have changed the visual stylings of Kaladesh.
Sure.
And would have called it something different, right? Because they would have already kind of tested like market. It's like market testing. Like, hey, what do you guys think of this? Like, oh, these are cool. Oh, these Thopters are kind of neat. Awesome. Because in 2 years, you're going to get like a whole set of this stuff. So we're glad that you like this little snippet, you know?
Yeah, that's very clever. I guess it is. Well, yeah, it is just good business planning, basically.
Right. It is. Absolutely.
They use us very well.
Yeah. I mean, we even do it like, so in our game, we have some cards that are like super, super generic because like in Varia, it's totally different from like any other CCG out there. We have 0 minions. We have 0 things that are summoned. Like the entirety of the game is if you and I, Nathan, got in a fight and we were 2 boxers, like cards represent punches, kicks, blocks, right?
Oh, okay.
And so the because it's so new, we had to introduce cards that were just purely vanilla. Like they have literally no mechanics beyond like the absolute base. Imagine like a 2/2, like a bear in Magic, like a 2/2 for 2, right? There's no frill. It's just like, I need to teach you what a creature is, right? And so on our flavor text, we've introduced a bunch of different characters and a bunch of different ideas for stuff that we don't even know if we have any intention of fleshing it out or not. It's just, let's just see what people think is interesting and gravitate towards, you know? And then from there, you can kind of flesh it out into maybe a realm or a world or a group of people or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I suppose, that's really interesting because I guess obviously Magic's got this scope, this huge range, not only of planes, but individual like people and things. So I guess starting up a whole new lore, like, how far do you range your initial bit of lore to test what people like and don't? Especially if you don't necessarily have minions and things. Obviously, you're, I guess, I guess there's slightly less ability to do would you find there's slightly less ability to do world building in a game where you're mostly focusing on actions rather than the characters and individuals?
Surprisingly, there's a lot of room. Like there's actually a ton of room to explore. And the reasoning is because people have the capacity to be so different. Like if you think about your 5 closest friends, all of you are different, right? You all have things that you like, things that you don't like. You would each punch slightly differently. One of you might kick while the other one might headbutt. Like you all have your own personalities. And so every time that we were introducing, so we have 7 classes and we focused on like one particular character for each class, but then within those decks are generic cards that can kind of go anywhere. And on those, we just threw stuff at the wall, like see what sticks. Like literally just told our artists like, hey, just paint me a badass looking knight. Like just, I don't care what you do, just make a knight swinging a sword and then we'll name it, we'll write flavor text and make it work, you know? And in doing that, we're just exploring these totally different things because like all of our artists that we employed, they're all super different and they're from all over the world. And so like how one person decides to depict a character fighting is going to look totally different from how another person does it. And just that alone creates these like vastly different characters who, when you look at them, you feel like they have totally different background stories. Like it's really, really interesting. Like thankfully people are so able to be unique. It's not like if our game was all about like tigers fighting, like, yeah, that'd get boring like so fast.
There's
like
not as much texture as there to a
yeah,
wild
like how many
animal.
different ways can you show a tiger,
Yeah.
But
And I suppose, especially like to do parallel to Magic nowadays, and Wizards really want to focus on planeswalkers and the nuance of the specific characters. So if anything, it does feel like Magic's doing the same thing, of where you want to focus on the individual because it's much easier to relate to than, oh, there's a mystical mammoth. Yeah, I remember when I saw one of those last Tuesday. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Right.
So when you're writing for, like, you say, like, everyone's different and you can kind of explore and expand, and there's like a surprising amount of range in something that doesn't seem that there would be. Does that extend to if you're writing a piece of flavor text, or if you're doing a naming convention, but it's for a specific character?
Right.
Do you find yourself having to key into that character's voice? Like, if you know you've got a quoted bit of flavor text, do you find that you're having to play that character, or is it still predominantly it's Anthony writing the text? Like, do you know what I mean?
So, yeah, absolutely. So I would say that I think that the important thing as a writer is to figure out your style and the themes that you gravitate towards, because then that will help you be able to write for any character. So, like, my go-to example would be on Ixalan, on the card Perilous Voyage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't relate to Vraska. I don't think that I could ever really write quotes to her that would do her justice.
Sure.
But I very much like to write with a sense of like irony, or kind of point out different ways of thinking about stuff. Like I really, or humor. Like I also, Mike's gonna kill me for this, but I had a weird reputation when I first came into Magic that like I hated humor on cards, which like I don't even know how that got started. Like, because I don't like I hate humor on cards when it doesn't serve the card. So like on Gorilla Titan, where it makes fun of the art.
Yeah, I want a banana this big, which just it's the one it just doesn't work. Yeah, it's very disjointed.
So mad because.
It's fourth wall breaking and out of context. It's bizarre. Yeah.
But the thing that is the worst offender, I think, is that a creative person spent time and energy making a badass 4-armed like tiger gorilla monster. And in one line, that writer just devalued everything that artist
took
did.
a massive shit all over it.
Yeah.
It takes out any brevity.
It would be like if you went to see the statue of David and there was a quote underneath it about cock sizes. You'd be like, this just ruins like everything. It's so silly.
Well, I guess it was big enough to fall off. Yeah, great.
Yeah, right. That's
good.
Like, so
thanks for your addition.
Imagine that. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine going to the museum and just like seeing that like on a plaque? Like,
oh no!
It would just like it would just ruin. Oh, it's terrible. But anyway, so that's the kind of humor that I do not like. But I love humor that like serves the card. So like,
sure.
A great example, Sling Gang Commander.
Yes.
I think it's called. So like, I wrote that flavor text, right? Like, because goblins are stupid, and just like the concept of first rock. Like as if you were like first lieutenant or something in an army, like for goblins, like what's a great honor? Like, oh, I want to be the first one to get slung out of this like slingshot thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Goblins are gold for flavor.
Like absolutely. It's the appropriate place to do that kind of stuff. And like even the art, like it, like, Craig nailed it with this like awesome goblin. He's got like the airplane goggles on. He just looks like he's so stoked to be in this slingshot. Like it's a great opportunity to do something lighthearted and fun and humorous. Like,
and you can slip a pun in and not feel too cheesy about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like there is an appropriate place to do it where it will actually heighten the card. What I don't like is when it's just thrown in willy-nilly and like just devalues like hard work that other people have done.
Sure.
Right.
But I mean, on Perilous Voyage, like going back to that card, because like that's kind of what's.
Oh yeah, right. That was what we were talking about. I got a little sidetracked.
No,
Hey,
it's all right.
welcome to the podcast. This is
yeah,
what
exactly. It's giving me time to look up the card art. To be honest with you, so you've got Perilous Voyage, and the card art is it's Jace falling off a cliff. Spoilers for anyone who doesn't know the Ixalan story.
Right.
Fucking late to the party. So I say it every time.
That's like someone getting mad when you're like, Icon shot first. Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? Like,
No, it's the Sixth Sense. It's like everyone by now knows he's a ghost. It's just it's not even a
someone
big
yell at me the other
He's
day.
dead?
I had someone yell at me the other day for like talking about episodes of Community, and I'm like, you have fucking let that ship sail, don't you?
Oh my god!
How can you be all about
what else can we?
spoilers?
What else can we ruin for late? Oh, Neo dies. Neo dies.
So you have Jace falling off a waterfall, and Vraska reaching out to try and grab him and save him. And the flavor text is, for the first time in her life, Vraska tried to prevent death. Now there is humor there, like as you were saying, like it's irony. It's and there is humor in that irony, even if it is kind of dry and it is kind of dark.
Right.
But did you feel more comfortable like writing that for Vraska as opposed to having like a quote on there?
Yes, 100%. So to me, so like, so what I did to capture this card, so like when you look at it, if you imagine there wasn't flavor text there, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a very dangerous card to write for in terms of a quote, because it becomes too easy to have people like, no, or yelling or like something stupid like that, or like. So I knew right away that a quote probably wouldn't work here, but it was such a personal moment that was happening between these two characters that I felt like it needed something from one or the other, right? And just looking at the art, like, I found it to be ironic that Vraska, who is a Gorgon, who literally turns things to stone just at a glance, and on her first card would summon assassins that had Phage's untouchable ability, right? I was like, this is interesting in that she's trying to save a life rather than, wanton death and destruction, right? So
it's almost like a quote of a thought at that point, isn't it? So
right.
It's not, you're quoting her voice. It's quoting what, like almost like I can imagine her smirk, not a smirk, but there's almost that as it crosses her mind of being like, well, this is new.
Right, or like, what am I doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
As she looks at Jace, go, I swear I was trying to kill you less than a week ago,
less than a year ago. Like,
yeah, that's great.
And so, like, a lot of it, it's almost like I used to talk to my cousin about this a lot because he is a musician, right? And he always talks about when he's writing songs, like finding a hook, like what's the hook, and then you kind of build everything around that, right? And a lot of writing is very similar in that, like, you're just trying to find, like, what is that hook? Like, what's the idea, like the core of what I want to get across? Because at the end of the day, like, if somebody reads my flavor text and they feel like they wasted their time, I've failed.
Yeah.
In the same way that if you wrote a song and you played it for me and I was like, man, I wish I could get those 3 minutes back. Like, you failed me, not necessarily failed in general, right? 'Cause somebody else might totally dig it, right? But if the majority of your audience doesn't feel like reading that line was worth it, then that's not good, right? Then it probably shouldn't be there. So half the battle is just trying to figure out, like, okay, what's the hook? Like, what's the idea or the theme or the tone? Like, what do I want to evoke in whatever I write here? And so when I looked at this card, I was like, okay, I want to talk about how Vraska is trying to prevent death instead of saving, or trying to prevent death instead of causing it, right? And so once you have that idea, then it's all about just arranging words in a way where you deliver that line in the most succinct way that also gets your audience to do what you want them to do. And really what I wanted people to do was have the same realization that I had when I first saw the card. Because, like, I'm a fan of Magic too, and like when I was working on it and I first saw that art, I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. This is a cool moment. And so I had this thought of, like, that's kind of interesting. Like, this is out of character for Vraska. And so I wanted other people to have that same experience. So it's just a matter of trying to write it in a way where I'll trigger that in your brain. Like Stephen King talks about this all the time, and I think it's like the coolest quote about writing is that when you're reading a book, you're communicating telepathically with the author of that book. Like their brain is sending ideas into your brain, and neither one of you are talking to each other.
That's very powerful, isn't it?
And it's
Yeah,
amazing.
right, that's
like
brilliant.
that's such a cool thing that writing can do.
But I mean, it is true. You are our overlords, because if you look at a card, like, I mean, especially for Magic, called the flavor text at the bottom, if you, as you say, because you are emotionally contextualizing the entire card and putting the little final wrapping and bell and whistle on it, you're the reason why the cards can be liked, as you say, liked or hated. So as far as that you have quite a bit of control, considering
Right.
you could have done anything with that card. You could have pushed it in any direction. And as you say, it's really nice to know that not only was the intention wasn't even found until the flavor text got put to it. It wasn't like
Right.
a complete picture. It took some development to get to that. And it's true, it did. I had the same thought. So well done. You succeeded, at least for me. So thank you.
I love that card.
Yeah.
You were speaking a little bit there about, you were diving into the idea of you finding the hook and talking to your cousin, and it's almost like a musical connection. And I've heard you talk about that before, right? Like either in conversations that we've had, or I've seen in articles that you've done previously. Like you have this thing, like I've dubbed it the band theory, but it's like it's your thing. Like that's just what I've called it. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Can you
absolutely.
elaborate on this? Yeah.
So like when you look at a card, right? It's really a game piece, right? And it has multiple parts to it. And really those parts need to work together to create the narrative of that card. And those things are the name, the type line, the flavor text, if there is any, the mechanics, and the art. Those are the kind of like 5 things. And really, if you want to lump the type line and the mechanics together, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
So really, you can think of it as 4 things. You have mechanics, flavor text, art, and the name, right? And I like to equate those 4 things to a band, where you have the lead singer, the lead guitar player, the bass player, and the drummer. And so any musician will tell you that the 2 most important people in any band are the drummer and the bass player, because they're creating like the foundation that everything else is kind of built on. If you've ever gone to a friend's house who plays guitar and they sit there and they just play a bunch of solos for you and you get bored, but if you listen to like a metal song and there's this awesome solo like right in the middle, or like a Van Halen song and there's this crazy solo in the middle, but it makes sense because it's contextualized by like everything else that's happening around it, right? Like that's the difference, right? And so the 2 kind of like foundations of any card are the mechanic and the flavor text.
Sure.
Like those 2 things can help just cement whatever the narrative is that this card is trying to capture, like in those 2 areas. And then the lead singer is the name, right? Because that's the thing that you see first. That's the thing that you read first. To go off my Stephen King thing, that's the thing that you hear in your head first, right? And it kind of makes you, it puts you in the right mindset. And then the art is like the guitarist, like the one who's always on the artists. Like they're the ones who are always on like the front of the CD in like moody and alone, like holding their guitar like it's like a baby or something.
With a spotlight.
Yeah, they're the ones with their name on the card bottom, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. But like my point in saying that they're a band is that if you were to go see a band and any one of those 4 individuals was out of sync with the other 3, you immediately notice that, and it creates dissonance, and it makes it harder for you to enjoy the art. And when I say art, I mean all 4 of them working in concert, right?
Sure.
And
Well,
so
this is the thing that we always talk about on this podcast is that, including the mechanics, everything on that bit of cardboard
absolutely,
makes that card
I don't
resonate
know
with
how
you.
you have a conversation about flavor and not talk about mechanics.
I mean,
Like,
that's our very first episode. We said that the idea of a Vorthos and a Mel, this kind of like less flavor versus this function, and they're two separate things, is bullshit. Like,
right?
it has
Oh,
to
dude,
come
I
together.
They
completely
inform one
agree.
another. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do not. I think that is such a wrong way to think about game design. Like saying like, oh, I want to create things for the Melvins. I want to create things for the Vorthos. Like, no, like you want those two things to be so intertwined
Yeah.
that there is no divide. Like
Mhm.
those are the best games. Those are the best game pieces. Those are the best cards. Like the games where you go through a tutorial in the beginning and you don't even know that you are in a tutorial because it's so like engrossing and captivating. Like those are the best games. Nobody likes to play those Call of Duty games where you have to spend 30 minutes learning how to cock a gun for like the thousandth time. It's bullshit. It's
Yeah.
so stupid. But like, what was it, like Halo 2? Where the beginning you like played through like a cinematic, or like any of the Metroid
Mhm.
Prime games.
Or Metal Gear Solid, when you open up and the credits are rolling, you're already playing.
Yeah,
You're already in the
phenomenal.
story. It's already happening.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
You like don't even realize what's happening, and like that sort of merging of flavor and mechanics is that's really why I say that that's like the bass guitar and the drums. Like those two things need to be working totally together to create this like foundation where it's hard to fail, right? Like you're serving the rest of the card, and then it's just up to the name and the art to drive it home.
Nice.
Like it's like nausea, like the card nausea, right? You
Yeah.
have all creatures get -1/-1 until the end of turn. Like that can be anything, right? And so the art of having this like weird dwarf guy like taking his boot off and it stinks and everyone else is coughing and looking like they're going to throw up, right? That ties it nausea a little bit, but until you have that line of was it something I said, right? To just wrap everything together, right? It doesn't work.
Contextualize, yeah.
Because you have this super serious name, nausea. You have this like very base mechanic. All creatures get -1/-1. Like that can be anything, right? And then you have this piece of art, and the piece of art sticks out because it's a little comical and it's a little bit different than what you typically expect to see on a Magic card, especially something that causes creatures to get -1/-1. Like they're pushing their boundary a little bit in a good way, right? They're testing waters, testing different things. So that's somewhere where like flavor text was like incredibly important to bring all of those things together and kind of hold the card in place.
I mean, that's so cool that you mentioned that exact card, Nausea, because they've printed in M21, one set that's just come out, Karavek the Spiteful, who's a legendary creature that has other creatures get -1/-1. So it's almost exactly the same ability, but that other creatures get -1/-1. In his flavor text, he talks about how he hurts his enemies and people who are on his side as well, because it's all other creatures other than him.
Right, exactly.
And like to look at it, if you were just coming from a Mel perspective, those two mechanics are almost identical, but everything around it, all this different other ingredients in the kind of flavor soup, completely round out to be, you wouldn't confuse those two cards, right? They are completely different and their own sort of thing, even though they're seemingly very similar.
And spite, so cool. Like causing him spiteful, is perfect in a number of ways. One, because like spite as just a concept perfectly lines up with the idea of everyone but me, right? So other creatures get -1/-1, but I'm fine. Yeah. But at the same time, it's actually a callback to a card in Visions called Karavik Spite.
Oh, nice. Yes. I did not know that. That's really cool.
That's a
so
deep cut.
Like that to me is whoever named Karavik, because I didn't work on this set, so I don't know.
Sure.
But they are not only, this is where you level up in flavor text, is that not only is that individual who named this character serving the card, but they're also serving the game as a whole. And this is a game that's existed, for 30 years, right? Like there's a breadth of cards out there now. And by doing these tiebacks and these little hints and callbacks and whatnot, you're not only serving the singular card, you're serving the game. And when you can do that, like that's a lot harder to do, right? Without it being super obvious or without it detracting from the card itself, right? Because it's like, to me, that's like the difference between making one really kick-ass song on an album and making a concept album. Like those are two totally different animals, right? And I think that's like a hallmark of a really good writer, when they're able to put those little threads in and have you not even notice. But the diehard fan who's been around since Mirage or whatever, like they'll notice, or someone who's on Scryfall and they're going through all the Karavik cards because they're trying to make a Karavik commander deck, and they're like, oh, Karavik Spite. Whoa, wait a minute, Karavik Spite. Karavik Spiteful. Like that's pretty cool, and then
that's really cool.
It kind of adds like a nice little layer to their deck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, talking about like leveling up writing and kind of making sure things go to the next level, like to bring it back to you a little bit more as a writer, you said that Amonkhet was like your baby, was like your set to really work on when it comes to Magic the Gathering. Like, was that because you felt that you improved as a writer, like yourself? Did you feel like your skills and your talents kind of exceeded, or was there anything that you played around with a bit more in that set that you didn't do beforehand?
That's a great question. So
yeah, put you on the spot a little bit.
Really, you are putting me on the spot. Yeah, I feel like it was a number of things. I felt like I was really hitting my stride as a writer. Like I just felt like my skills had really improved. I was on a I'm trying to think of the right word. It was like a not a creative high, but like
a hot streak, like you're in the
zone. Like I really was on, I guess, like, God, I'm gonna use NBA Jam reference. Like I was on fire, quote unquote, because like I was working on Magic, which like I was growing up like as a kid. Like if I could go back in time and tell 9-year-old me, like, dude, you're gonna grow up, you're gonna work on Magic, and then you're gonna invent your own card game, and then you're gonna like do all this, like I'd be like, my head would explode, right? But I was working on Magic at the time. I was working on a number of other projects in like the tabletop RPG space, like some D20 stuff, some D&D supplements and things like that. So I was writing a lot, and I was really starting to kind of like find my voice as a writer and like hone my craft. And at the same time, I was spending a lot of time doing a lot of research and thinking about like really what is the job of flavor text, and I was starting to come to the realization of what we were just talking about earlier, and how like this thought process of like separating Melvin and Vorthos like really isn't a good idea, and really we should be doing the opposite. So I was trying to figure out ways to do that in my writing, and I experimented with that in Amonkhet a lot.
Sure.
And it ended up really paying off. Amonkhet, and so up until that point, I had maybe 75 total cards that I had written either the name or the flavor text for. And in Amonkhet and Hour Devastation, I think I had like, it ended up being like 10% of the entire block. It was like, nice. I had like 130 something like writing submissions that got printed, like it just
which I thought was a lot. And when we were speaking earlier, I went, "Oh wow, that's amazing," and you went, "Oh no, it's not that much, only 10%." It's you're on how big's like the writing team that you were working on?
I mean, I try not to like. I was trying to be a little humble.
You don't want to blow your own horn, but really you fucking smashed it. Like that's what you're saying.
If you think about it from like a numbers perspective, when a set comes out, there's 300 cards in the set. Every single one of those cards has the potential to have a name and flavor text. So right away, there's 600 possible places where you can write something, right? Obviously, that starts to get pared down as you have cards that have like way too many rules text and there's not enough room for flavors text,
Sure.
or cards that don't need flavor text, or cards that are reprints and so the name can't change, right? And so that starts to pare down and it ends up being like maybe 450 opportunities to write something. From there, you work on a team of dedicated writers. Usually it's about 5 to 7 people, but then on top of that, anybody at Wizards of the Coast who has access to the database, they can just pop in, name a card, and leave, right? So really you're competing with a large pool of people who are all very invested in the product, right? So it's very competitive, and I totally love this about the way that it used to work. But like if somebody wrote something and somebody else took what you wrote and changed the word and made it better,
Sure.
that's theirs. Like if it gets picked, they win. And some people really didn't like that, but I loved it because it created this kind of like camaraderie where you would feed off of each other and work with each other, and somebody would pitch an idea and you'd be like, oh, I like the hook, but I think you're delivering it wrong, we should do it this way.
The yes and
it's much more of a team effort, so to get things into the game that you just sat down, wrote, and like nobody touched it is not an easy thing to do. But
that's cool, and you managed to smash it, like you say. You
yeah,
got like
in Amonkhet,
130 odd.
yeah, I mean, I was shocked at how many things actually made it through, and like, to kind of like reference what I was talking about earlier, one of the areas was like I named all the gods, for example,
Sure.
and technically, like, so to be totally honest, I didn't name them in that I came up with the epithets and everything, but
like the true, or
right, like Oketra the True, right?
yeah, sure, yeah.
I didn't write that. When we got the style guide, she was labeled as Oketra the True, right? But in the set, like when we got the cards, she was labeled as Oketra, God of Solidarity. So it was very obvious to me that they were initially trying to give the gods in Amonkhet the same writing style as the gods in Theros, because
And in
that's how
fact, that
all the gods in
actually,
Theros are.
that Oketra, God of Solidarity, actually ends up in one of the flavor texts. I was looking through Amonkhet
Yes.
block, and that's actually in there, which I
Right.
was really shocked by. I didn't notice that before.
And Ronus, God of Strength, and things like that.
Sure.
Right. So what I thought was, mechanically, these cards, yes, they are similar to Theros. That's true, right? But really, we should differentiate them in some way because this is a totally different world, right?
Sure.
And so to give them the exact same naming convention as the gods on Theros doesn't really make any sense. And so I saw these like cool ways that they were referenced like in the packet, and I was like, I think we should use these. And the cool thing about the tool we were using is that we could communicate. So I, wrote a little note. I was like, hey, like, I think that these should be differentiated because we're on a, like, players are smart and they'll understand like that this is a mechanical callback that is like, hey, this is how we do gods, right?
Yeah.
As these kind of like pseudo enchantment things, that creatures that kind of like turn on and off.
Yeah, they've got like a requirement to be creatures. Yeah.
Right. Like they'll pick up on that. Like players are going to pick up on that. I don't think we have to beat them over the head by having their names be exactly the same. Like a way that you can differentiate gods of this plane from gods on another plane is to use a different naming convention.
And also for the gods of Amonkhet, because they are much more present than the gods of Theros. Like the gods of Theros are almost theoretical in the fact that they're up in Nyx, whereas the gods of Amonkhet walk among the people. So to give them more personalized identities like Oketra the True or Bontu the Glorified, it rounds off a lot more succinctly than giving them some kind of massive title like they're the god of something.
Right. Exactly.
And the only thing you need to tie them together is the fact they are both gods. Everything else can be different to express the differences across the planes. Yeah, obviously naming conventions would be different because the people are different. You know, the way they express things are different. The way they look at the world is
the
different.
culture.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was important to communicate to the players that each one of those gods represented something important along the conveyor belt of like the trials.
Sure.
And so like Ronus was the god of strength and Oketra was the god of solidarity. And so it was important to like communicate that, right? So one of the ways that I tried to do that was as lessons. So like one of the really cool things that I really liked about Amonkhet was this idea that like so like I went to Catholic school, right? And growing up we would have religion class, right? And there were always these kind of like parables and like stories that were meant to kind of teach you morals.
The good old allegories. Right? Oh yes, we love them.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I'm a Sunday school kid myself as well. Yeah, Roman Catholic, so I know exactly what you're on.
So what I thought was cool about Amonkhet was that instead of having this intermediary where it was like a story that I was told that is supposed to teach me about God and morals, right? That's kind of like a middleman type of thing. On Amonkhet, the God is like right there and watching me fail, and almost like a parent, and telling me like, "Hey, do you know why that failed? Because you did X, Y, Z. Don't do that next time." Right? They take this very like parent teacher kind of role, so to speak, and I thought that was really interesting. So what I tried to do is on at least one card in each color, I tried to put a quote from the gods themselves speaking to an initiate, teaching them a lesson. So, like on the card Manglehorn, the whole point of the art is to communicate this beast that when it enters the battlefield breaks your shit, right? That's what the card does when you're playing the game. That's what's important. I summon a 2/2 that comes in and breaks your stuff, right? But there's an initiate in the art, and the initiate's sword is being broken. And so I thought, oh, this would be a cool place to do some world building where you can have a quote as almost as if like the person looking at the art, like the viewer, if you are Ronus, right?
Oh, cool.
And you're looking at the initiate fail, you're the parent, and you're saying, hey, if you rely too much on your weapons, you'll watch your dreams shatter in your hands. Because he's the god of strength, and he's not someone who necessarily cares about, weaponry and armor and stuff like that. He's like, no, build yourself up. You need to be stronger. You can't rely on tools if a tool's only as good as the tool using it, right? So you need to make sure that you're strong enough and not rely so much on this other stuff, right? So these are the kind of things where like up until that point, I hadn't really been thinking that way. Like I was more just trying to make sure that whatever I was writing like fit the card and helped, either explain the mechanic or build up the mechanic or something like that, or touch on world building or something. But on Amonkhet, I really started thinking about the entire card and like looking at it and going like, and even beyond the card, like you're a player holding a card physically in your hand. When you're looking at it, like that almost feels like you're a god looking down on a dude getting your thing stepped on. So like, what if I try to put you in what if I try to make you feel like Ronus while you're holding this card? Like that's a harder thing to do, but like more rewarding, I feel like, when it works,
No, absolutely.
Because the original concept of Magic the Gathering like is that you are this wizard that's casting and throwing spells at one another, and it's it brings that kind of role play element into it, which is
right.
Whenever
it's become a much more objective game, hasn't it? It's much. It feels less subjective these days. It feels much less like you're throwing the lightning bolts.
That's a
can of worms, I know.
Don't like about Planeswalkers. You've hit a nerve because like. Talk about like, so there's this thing called pseudo-narrative dissonance that I great. It's like my talk now. If you want to put me on the internet and say there's something that I am totally against, not comedy, right? That's not true. But narrative dissonance, like 100%, I despise when a game shows me one thing and tells me that the lore is something else, right? I jokingly say that Odyssey is my favorite block of all time because it is the biggest proponent of pseudo narrative dissonance. Like you have a story about pit fighters in an arena, and all of the mechanics are about death in the graveyard. Like nothing makes sense. It just doesn't line up. Talk about Melvin and Vorthos being on like opposite sides of the planet, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. And so what I don't understand right now in Magic is that you are a planeswalker. Like you, the person playing the game, you're a planeswalker. So I do not understand
how you get to play them.
Every time I see a card, I can understand summoning them. Like I get it. You summon a friend. It wouldn't be that much different than like if we were playing a game and I summoned a buddy of mine into the game. Like that I can wrap my brain around. But when cards say like destroy target planeswalker or deal 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, it's like, but I am a planeswalker. Like I don't, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like what you're doing is you're creating a divide between me, the player, and planeswalkers, the game piece. And so now you're putting this question in my head of like, you told me I'm a planeswalker, but I have a planeswalker card.
Yeah, where's the portal of
functions
perspective
differently than I do? Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because up until introducing the card game, you could just think. I mean, you can create your own head because we get annoyed about the ideas of like countering creatures and things like that. Like, where are you summoning them from? Do you have a meta narrative for it? Things like that. But yeah, when you took that portal of that you are having the battle and you made those same pieces that you are also a game piece, like yeah, it doesn't make sense. You can't play chess and be a knight at the same time.
Right. That is such a great analogy because if we sat down, so when we sit down to play chess, right? What would make sense to you if I told you like, okay, you're the god of the White Kingdom and I'm the god of the Black Kingdom and we're going to have like a battle, right? And we're going to control our worshipers and we're going to fight. Like that would be a narrative that makes sense. Or if I just said that you are the commander of the army and your job is to protect the king and you command the Black army and I command the White army, right? Like those are narratives that make sense. But if we sat down to play chess and you're like, hey, what am I? And I was like, oh, you're a knight.
Yeah, you can go 2 spaces forwards
like,
and 1 space to the left.
Isn't this a knight? Like, or no, and I'm a pawn. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. And it causes confusion. You know,
I'm imagining a kid as a person playing a game of chess where they're the king who's playing a game of chess where they're the king who's playing a game of chess, and it just keeps going in and in and in.
It's like
the perspective doesn't work. Yeah, it's in most narratives you do one or the other. Either you're the person controlling all of your pieces, or you are one of the pieces themselves. But you never get to be both. And even in the times when you're both in, like, I'm going to bring up Yu-Gi-Oh, which is obviously faux pas, but there is an episode of that, and it just kind of it's one of those things. It's a silly mechanic that doesn't necessarily work. You can't put yourself in the game and then also be bigger than it doesn't work.
I guess this is one of the problems with having a game that is almost 30 years old is that different writers or different like story leads or art directors come in and they kind of slightly tweak the narrative to whatever they feel fits best with the times, right? You're working on a game that's brand new.
Right.
Like you've started your own company and you've got Varia, which is one of your first products coming out of this game. Obviously there's got to be a huge amount of difference between working on something that was already 25 years old when you came into it versus something that's like brand new. Like, how do you avoid these pitfalls? Yeah,
because Magic when it first started was like, when you look at that, didn't have really a narrative. None of the cards work in like concert with each other. Isn't necessarily a plane that we're on. So yeah, obviously, having seen this in retrospect, you obviously have a massive step forward. But I mean, how did you like limit the scope, but also keep it focused?
So really, what we did was when we set out, we had so part of the joy, right, is that I'm my own boss. So the things that I really care about, I got to make sure that they were front and center in the entirety of the process, and from day one. I was like, we need mechanics and flavor to be the same thing. Like, I do not want a divide. I don't want there to be this, like, Melvin Vorthos. Like, that's not a thing. Like, every single card needs to have a narrative, and the mechanics, the name, the art, they all have to fit that narrative so that it makes sense. And then that's on like a card level. From a game level, I was like, our goal was to create really a combat system, right? Where it enabled me to fight you in one-on-one combat. Like, if you think about most trading card games out there right now, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, Pokemon even, right?
Mm.
Um, those games are a lot like an RTS, like StarCraft, where you are a commander and you summon a bunch of dudes to do stuff for you.
Mm.
That's kind of like how pretty much every trading card game plays. You just summon a bunch of stuff and it's like resource
Yeah, it's
management.
like Civilization, yeah, or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what I wanted to do was like, and I'll use StarCraft as my example. Like, rather than you're the commander and you're summoning a whole bunch of stuff and doing all the managing of the resources, I wanted to put you in the shoes of a single soldier, like just one resource.
Mm.
So almost like when Warcraft 3 came out and you got to have the hero unit like Arthas or
Sure.
whatever. So I want you to just be Arthas, and your opponent is just Maev, and you two are going to fight each other, and that's it. And so right away we knew, like, okay, well, we can't have minions. Like, they're gone, right?
Yeah.
So we need interaction. And so, like, all the cards represent actions that your character can take, like a punch, a kick, shield block, stuff like that, right?
Mm.
But more importantly, to answer your question, the way that we kept it succinct was we were like, okay, well, what am I versus what are you? And the way that we went about that was, you pick your class. And so if I am a warrior and you are a mage, then the way that I approach battle should feel like the way a warrior would approach battle. So I want to have a two-handed axe or a hammer or something. I want to get up in your face. I want to hit really hard. I want to be able to, like, cut your head off, right? We made a list of stuff, and then we literally have a card called Decapitate that, like,
Nice.
if you get it to work, you immediately kill the opponent. Like, you just cut their head off.
Oh, no.
Because that's what would happen if you decapitated someone, right?
That's what would happen.
Flavor and function. Oh,
if
we've made it
you
work.
were fighting a warrior, right? Like, if you were in Skyrim and you came across a dude who maxed out in strength, like, he's going to get that cutscene where your head goes rolling down the side of the mountain.
Mhm.
Sure.
So, like, the cards that exist in that deck put you in the shoes of this, like, burly, just awesome frontline warrior. And when you're playing the game, the way that you approach playing the game makes you feel that way. Now, the mage, on the other hand, is all about disengaging, getting out of range, and then taking different cards and fusing them together into, like, these big, like, bombastic spells. And so you get this kind of feeling of like an elementalist, where you can take fire and water and mix them together and create something new and just, like, hurl it at your opponent, right?
Mm.
And so each one of our classes has its own kind of identity that when you buy it, it makes kind of, you have something to expect. It's almost like if I showed you a dragon card, you expect it to feel like a dragon when you play it. You want to feel like you summoned a dragon. You don't want to feel like you summoned a goblin, right? You want to feel like there's a dragon on the table, and you want everyone else at the table to feel like there's a dragon on the table. And so when you go to play Varia and you decide, I want to be the shadow assassin, we made sure that when you're playing that deck, you feel like one and your opponent feels like they're fighting one. And so from there, like, since we had that early direction, really what we did was we just built a combat system, and then we tweaked each deck within that system to feel different from the other ones, right? And we talk about feeling a lot, but we wanted to make sure, like, that was always our principal question of our playtesters. Like, did you feel like a warrior? Did you feel like an assassin? If they said no, then we went back to the drawing board and tried again, you know, because that was like, cool mechanics are cool, and there's always going to be interesting mechanics in any card game. Like, that's not the hard part. The hard part is picking the right mechanics that make you feel like you're in the shoes of whatever it is that it's a lot like writing. Like,
Sure.
I'm trying to get an idea in your head, right? So like through playing the game, I want you to get this sense that you are an assassin, you know?
That's really cool to like sort of hear, because one of the big draws of Magic, and one of the things that we talk about a lot on this show is the fact that different colors and color identity comes a lot into like how you play the game and the kind
Right.
of the paths that you take. And it seems that you've distilled that with Varia into individual characters, and it's a lot more personal. It's a lot more hands on.
Right. So, right. What we ended up doing was we went kind of like the RPG route.
Yeah.
We used attributes. So, like, if you play D&D, it would be like strength,
exactly.
dexterity,
Cool.
that kind of stuff, right? So we have an attribute system where different attributes are able to do different things mechanically, right? But we also have a class system that really puts you like aggression warrior. You're going to be a frontline, like in your face, awesome fighter, right? If you're a intellect based warrior, you might be more of a fencer, or like combat tactician, where you kind of watch your opponent and learn from them before you start fighting.
Cool.
Or like a subtlety based warrior would play differently. You might feint a lot and pretend you're going to punch, but then kick and try to catch your opponent off guard, and do that kind of stuff. So it enables a lot of freedom in that within those 7 attributes. Like we can do the same class over and over and over again. We could do 7 different warriors, but they're all going to feel slightly different. Almost like if you did, Magic does cycles sometimes where they'll do 5 different knights, and you'll have like a red one, a black one, a white one, a blue one, and they're all knights, but they each do something slightly different because that's what that color would do.
And it's a way of like telling a story, like it's narrative through playing, which is really cool.
Oh, it's my favorite. It's my favorite thing in the world. I love it.
We're running a little bit over our sort of usual hour. Are you all right to talk for a few more minutes? Like,
I'm totally. Yeah. My kid's asleep, man. I got nothing to do.
That's cool. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, it kind of hooks back to writing, but it's a little less about the sort of artistic side. It's more about the practicality side of crediting writers.
Right.
So one of the things that I've always tried to look at, and I know, Nathan, you've tried in the past as well, especially since doing this show or being more involved in Vorthos culture, is if you try and look up a list of names of who wrote what fucking flavor text, or like who actually put pen to paper, like it's so difficult to find a list, because as you said earlier on, like it's actually a lot more collaborative than maybe being an artist would be, because an artist, it's just you and the canvas and you do your thing.
And even the art, like even now, like if you notice on Twitter, something that they've started doing is when they show an art, they'll say who their art director was.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So like
right?
Cynthia Shepherd, for example.
Even the art is more collaborative than you might think,
Sure. I mean, that's a cool point. Like, they do credit art directors quite a lot now, which is actually a really good thing. And
I have so much. Oh my god, I have so much respect for art directors now, because, like, for our game, I've been having to commission artists and like tell them, they're like, "What should I paint?" And then I have to tell them, and then on top of that, they come back and they say, "Hey, can you give me feedback, because I want to grow. I want to get better as an artist." And like, what's kind of cool about our game is we have a lot of young artists who are like fresh out of school or just graduating, like they want to work on the big name product like Magic, obviously, and like D&D and stuff like that. We're kind of like a stepping stone, which feels really cool. Like that's like, we're like the CBGB before the band gets famous. Like we're kind of the first step, the first gig that they're getting, outside of school. But at the same time, they're coming to me for like, pointers and like, how do I get better? What do I do? What do I do differently? And so like I've had to like do a ton of research on just like art direction and like what are the things that I should be looking for and what should I be asking these people to do, and just in taking like courses online and stuff, like I've just learned to have so much more respect for like an art director, because I got to imagine that they're doing the exact same stuff. Like I've never done that for Magic, but I have to imagine that like Cynthia Shepherd, like when she sends out a request to an artist and they send back sketches and she has to pick the sketch that works best for the card, it might not even be the best in terms of like what would make the coolest piece of art, but it's the best image for the card. Then she has to tell the artist like, hey, this, and these are like hugely successful artists, right? Like Seb McKinnon, like she has to tell Seb McKinnon, like,
imagine turn down a Seb McKinnon and go, sorry, buddy, not this time. It's not. It wasn't quite.
Yeah.
or like she like 4 or 5 sketches at a time.
You are 90% of the way there. Here's how you get to 110. And like that's cool. Like that's like a really neat piece of the kind of like total narrative of that card, and her name doesn't show up anywhere either.
Well, this is the thing. Like it's hard. Like we spoke earlier about like artists being the lead singers and kind of being at the forefront, and like rightly so. Like the visual art of Magic the Gathering is one of the reasons it's such a good game. And
it sells the game 100%.
Yeah. And I don't 100%. Think artists get even enough credit or the forefront. Like, but the thing which you've done in Varia, which I'm looking at the card Flurry of Fists. This is a card that you showed me. Is that you've put in the bottom left hand corner where you would find like the artist name. You've put the name here, Mike Burns, and then you've got a word next to it, trifactor. So right. This is you crediting them for multiple things on a card, because there's no writers credit or there's no art director's credit, but here because you're a smaller you're a smaller workshop, like you're a smaller like games company, people do have to do more things, right? So you can actually afford to credit people and put their name out there, where otherwise they wouldn't necessarily have that ability.
I'm also my own boss, and like I'm in like a cool spot where I can just try shit that I always thought would be neat, like, and we're not an established brand, so like if we screw something up, like who really cares? Like nobody's gonna care. And honestly, I think more companies that are bigger, like fucking Wizards, like they should do more stuff where they're just like, we don't care. Like, so what? It doesn't really matter.
You try to tell Hasbro to say that it doesn't care. That's
do you know Magic fans?
No, it's like think about like the mountain that just came out that's just like made of goblins. Like that was those are the kind of ideas where like 99% of the time the brand team is like, we can't market that. Like, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. But somebody's like, no, man, this is cool and it's different and it's fun,
But the worst thing is now they know it's successful. They're going to do it every now and again and milk it.
Now we're just going to get a million, like, we're going to get a mountain of sphinxes or something, or a Fibblethrips or some weird thing, But I guess my point is that like, so, and Mike is, I'm fortunate that Mike is a really good friend of mine. I used to work, I'd have to travel for work, and I would stay in like northern Jersey, and Mike lived in, I think he lived in Jersey City at the time. But him and I would meet up, like while I was away from home, and we would just get pizza. We would meet at like a local card shop, and we would just play Magic and like, hang out. Like, he kept me sane because I was away from home. And so we would just like, we kind of like became friends that way. And then I was working on Varia, and I told him, I was like talking to him about it one time, and he was really interested. So I asked him if he would play test with me. And this was back when like it was just like a terrible game. Like it wasn't even a good game yet. And so he just like relentlessly played again and again. Like we would just meet up online and like play over Tabletop Simulator on Steam, and just like religiously, like twice a week, every week, we were just play testing, like me in my hotel room, right? And over time, like I just asked him, I was like, hey man, like you got any ideas for cards? And one of the ones that he threw out there was Flurry of Fists, like this idea of just like a whole bunch of punches in a row. And I was like, oh man, that's actually really cool. I like that. So then I was like, dude, you got to do the art for this card. Like you did the design, like you should do the art. So then he did the art, and then it dawned on me. I was like, Mike, like you have a really interesting opportunity here in that if you wrote the name in the flavor text for this card, you would have the trifecta. Like you would have the written flavor, the mechanical flavor, and the visual flavor. You will literally have done everything
from top to bottom. That's a rare thing to have that kind of influence over an entire card.
Right. Like when does that ever happen? And so he was like, all right, I'll do it. And so he wrote the name in the flavor text. And so I was like, I have to credit that somehow. And so that's where we came up with that, like, rather than just an artist credit, he gets a trifecta credit. Right.
That's really cool.
I'm hoping that we can keep doing in the future, like because right now the artists that we hire, they don't know what Varia is, right? Because it's never existed. Sure. But whereas like Seb McKinnon, like Seb grew up playing Magic with his brothers before he became a Magic artist. And so like hopefully one day we'll have that similar thing going on where like people who play Varia will then want to work on it. And then, I can try to get them to like, hey, would you want to try designing a card and then like get the trifecta? Like that would be kind of neat, right? And like hopefully that becomes like a thing. But to answer your question,
sure.
In terms of crediting, it is extremely difficult to credit someone on a piece of the card when it is highly collaborative. So in Mike's case, it was super easy because he literally did it all: name, flavor text, art, mechanics. Like he did everything. But on a given card, you might imagine that the name was written by one person, the flavor text was written by a different writer, the art was done by an artist who worked with an art director, the mechanic was done by a team of designers. So you have like 7-8 people who kind of like had their hand in that particular card. Not to mention the graphic design of the frame that you're looking at. Sure. If the frame has like an alt frame treatment, if there are any little like pips or icons anywhere, like mana symbols or attribute symbols or whatever, right? Like those are all designed by somebody. So you have to kind of like toe this line of like, who do I credit and who do I not credit? Right. And so with art, it's easy to credit an artist because it's right there and it's in its own little box. It's like, it's just like framed art on the wall. Like it's very clear that I'm looking at something somebody drew or painted. And so to give a name to that is like an easy thing to do. But the second that you take one step backwards and you're like, hey, maybe I should credit like the museum curator or the person who made the frame or, the person who did the matting or painted the wall that the painting is on.
Yeah, you put Richard Garfield on every single card because
it gets so big so fast, right?
Sure.
Or yeah, exactly. To your point, do you put Richard Garfield on literally everything because he invented the game that all of these like images are on? Like, so
artwork as well, like because it's a lot easier to go, if I want to find that piece of artwork, I look up the artist and I can find that piece of artwork. You're not necessarily going to have a person going, here's all of the different flavor texts of Magic cards I've written as accredited pieces of artwork that I've done, even though it is obviously adding into the card. It is, I guess that's maybe where you could. That's why you get the guitarist to be the person everyone's assigned fucking
right. They fixate. It's fixated on like because you have this awesome thing happening in front of you, right? If you go back to like a band example, right? When you're seeing a really good band, you have this amazing thing that's happening in front of you, and it's a lot easier to fixate on one piece of that entire thing than it is to just associate the entire thing as being awesome. It's the same reason why, like, when you go see a movie, you say, that's my favorite character. And you kind of like fixate on one character, even though like the reason you like that character so much is because you love the world that they were in, you love the way they were interacting with all the different other actors and characters, right? It's not just that character. You
Sure.
can't just take Han Solo out of the movie and just have him be awesome all the time. Like, Han Solo isn't that cool at Burger King. Like, he's just not. You know, he's only cool in the bar in Tatooine shooting first. Like the whole setup is what makes you love Han Solo. You know, and it's the same thing with music. Like, you fixate on, I really love this guitarist. It's the same thing with a Magic card. You're just like, I love this art. Like, this art is the reason that I really like this card, even though that might not be true. Right. But it's the easiest thing to just kind of like lock onto, because it's literally it's half the card. Right. And if you've never played the game before, it might be what got you to try it. In the same way that if like you've never heard a band before, if you hear a really sick guitar solo, you might be interested to like try that music, right?
Sure.
Or like if you see a poster with Han Solo on it or Boba Fett, right? You might be like, I kind of want to see what that's about, right? Because that just looks cool. So it's the hook that gets you in, but it might not necessarily be the reason that you stick around.
Sure, because it's supported by the writing and everything about the card around it.
Right.
Cool.
So it's like, I mean, there's a lot you can do. Like, you could try. We tried like saying like, okay, well, what if all of the writers were on a team and we called them like Team Black or Team Blue or something.
Sure.
And we just credited like, you know, artist credit, person, writing credit, you know, Team Green, right? But even that starts to break down, because like Team Green could be like Nathan and myself, and then like Team Blue could be the two of you, and Team Red could be like me and my brother. And then it's just like you have to track like all these different teams that have different people on them that like intermingle between the different things, and it becomes like a total mess unless you plan on like always keeping them separate from day one, which is super hard to do.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a tricky middle ground to strike.
Right. So it's just easier to not do it.
Yeah, just say it's a choir. You don't need to list every single name in the choir. It's the choir, and then it's the choir that you appreciate, not the tenor or the alto or anything like that.
I mean, that's fair enough, and I really like that idea that it's a collaborative process, and it's really cool to have chatted to you for like the past hour and a half or so, because as I said to you in one of our initial conversations, like to kind of get you on the show, was that to people like me and to people like Nathan, who like we're invested, obviously, because we're doing a podcast about magic.
Yeah, we like the whole band. We like the whole band.
Exactly. But like we're still essentially players. Like, we're not part of the creative process. The writing seems to be still a bit of a mystery, whereas the art processes are now a lot more kind of explained or sort of shown and celebrated. Like, the writing is still something that's shrouded in a bit of mystery. So it's really cool to have you come on and sort of chat about it. It's, you know, and I hope you guys get to chat about it more. I made this sound like this is the first interview you've done. Like, I know you've written like so many articles on things like cool stuff, but
oh my god, yeah.
Like, it's almost like we don't see enough of it, you know.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's one of those things where like it takes unfortunately it takes like a backseat a lot of the times. And there's a ton of really passionate, talented people who are working on all of these other parts of games that really make the entire thing sing, you know. And like, anytime that I can ever just like point in the direction of like when you see something on Twitter and it says like art director so and so, check out that art director.
Sure.
Like, see the other things that they were art director on, and try to imagine yourself in that role where like they're getting a whole bunch of different images coming in for if you think about it, like, the artist gets one card and their job is like, I need to make this card awesome. The art director is given a set and they're like, you need to make Amonkhet sing. You need to make this entire set visually work from card to card to card to card to card, and communicate a narrative and a vibe. And so that when somebody sees a card from Amonkhet, they immediately know that's from Amonkhet.
And it's gonna be really obvious if you fail because there's a lot of people looking at
That's
it.
tough.
Yeah, it's really tough.
And they're the ones who they get all these blank cards, and they have to decide, you know what, this is a good place for Seb. Like this card is where Seb can excel, right? Or if they're a really good art director, they'll say this is a card where I can take Seb and push him to be better.
Yeah, using your materials to the best of your ability.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like it's such a, they're like the conductor, right? Like they're like, yeah, you're way better at tuba than I am, and you're way better at violin than I am, and whatever, but like I'm gonna tell all of you what to do and you're all gonna be better because of it. Like that's insane.
And at the end of the day, they just look like some crazy person waving their hands around, but there is genius behind all of it.
People just ignore the conductor. They don't give a shit about the guy with the stick, but like that's the most important person. Like Cynthia Shepherd kills it. She kills it. She makes like some of the coolest settings and like picks the most perfect artist for the particular cards, and it's just like, it kills me when like you see those tweets come up and they're like, so and so like art directing, Cynthia Shepherd, and everyone's like, oh, I love this artist, blah 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 blah. Like, not a single I'm so tempted to just like jump into every single one of those threads and be like, Cynthia Shepherd is an amazing art director, and just like fucking put that everywhere.
No, let's do it.
You wouldn't even know who they were without the agent. Like, gives the claps to the agent. Come on.
It's just like that's insane.
I like how we've got you on as a writer and like talking about writing, and what this whole podcast has ended up being is check out your art directors.
Yeah, right.
Well, I guess like, to tie it all together, like now we're losing like the big broad stories and the big books. I mean, realistically, these is like the names and the flavor text are going to be where we see things. And I do think in the last few years we have seen a massive uptick in the amount of depth and the amount of creativity you see there. So I think we will see more. I hope we see more praise going towards it, because it is clearly a more important crutch to lean on now that we don't have much else to go on.
For sure.
For sure, yeah. And like if you see a card, if you see something and you read it and you're like, man, that flavor text is dope, right? Like that was cool. Tweet about it. Like put up like and what was even cool, what I used to do, and like I used to piss Mike off, is I would so we were doing snack time. Like Mike was the art half and I was the writing half. But we used to have this background where it was like frames, and when we would talk about art, he would like put the art in the frame, so it was like in the center of our stream or whatever. And so then when I used to talk about flavor text, I would crop the card so it was like just the written part, and I would put that in the frame. And he'd be like, that's not what the frame is for, like blah blah blah. He's like, that looks like shit. No, man, but, like,
I can't imagine Mike getting angry at
like
anyone.
This, I'm like, this is the, like, to me, like this is art, like in the same way that you might get like a cool Edgar Allan Poe quote like on your arm, or like put on a placard and put on your wall or something. Like
words are powerful.
Like, like call attention to it, and like when you're on Twitter, like just take a screenshot of like just that part of the card and just put it out there, so that it's not like you're not distracted, and you can really just kind of like sit there and read it and be like, oh shit, like that's cool. Like that's a cool little piece of writing, like it's hard. Like flavor text is hard. People think it's mostly just like exposition and like, it's poetry. Like you need to write it's not about writing the most simple thing in the most complex way. It's about taking like crazy complex ideas and trying to distill it down into like a one-liner.
Less than a haiku. That's all you've got.
It's hard. Like that's super hard to do.
Cool. I mean, well, that's. I think that's a really good sort of message to end on. To be honest with you, is to check out the flavor text. I mean, it's how we got chatting in the first place, is because we looked at flavor text and everyone started jumping in and chatting about it. Cool. So, I mean, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on. Like for a subject which we thought, we'll get kind of, we'll get some good stuff out of it. We got 10 times the amount of stuff that I thought we were going to get.
I told you, man, I'll talk about this forever.
I mean, we'll get you back on and we can chat for another like 5. I don't care.
Oh, yeah, I would be happy to, if you next time, if you want to just like talk about a particular set, or would I be happy to come back? Yeah, this is
We've
been
got
awesome.
some flavor. We've got some plain returns coming up, so I think we'll have some.
Oh,
flavor
for sure,
to dig
yeah.
into, for sure, yeah, absolutely.
But Ant, if people want to find you, people want to kind of catch up with what you're doing now because you've got a lot of exciting things going on. Where can people find you? What things do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I would just say the easiest way to kind of like get in contact with me directly is on Twitter. So I can't even remember what my handle is. I think it's still at Ant Tessitore.
It is.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll link it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Just I'm on Twitter. Just look me. If you just type Tessitore, chances are I'm like the only one.
And if you wanna remind people about your games company and your upcoming products.
Yes. So my company's called GuildHouse Games. So our website is guildhousegamesllc.com. Right now we have one product. It's called Varia. If you're into card games, which I'm assuming that like most of you guys and girls and whoever's listening are, definitely check it out. It's very different. It's like my kind of elevator pitch is most trading card games are RTSs, and this is like Mortal Kombat. It's like it's a totally different genre. It's still fantasy, and it's still got like the awesome art and that kind of stuff, but like gameplay totally different. So
we'll definitely be checking it out once it's all kind of released here in the UK. You can find us at MT Flavouring on Twitter. My personal Twitter is at Andy Manface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. Nathan, any final words?
No, I've just, the final thought I have is maybe that I now need to flag on that someone genuinely thought Snapdax was a great name to give to a giant cat, and they need to pause. That was my last thought. That's my trailing thought out of this episode.
Your last thought is you griping about Snapdax.
No, it's not right. It's impressed. I'm impressed at someone.
You're impressed by it. Sorry.
Snapdax. How can you ever say about? Anyway, that's my final thought. I won't keep my insanity. It's 2 a.m. nearly, and that's my final thought of the night.
Well, as ever, guys, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.